Kiska the orca, dubbed the loneliest orca in the world, passed away at Marineland after being alone since 2011. She died at the age of approximately 47 years old. She has been in captivity since she was 3 years old in 1979 from Iceland. And we're going to talk about why this is such a tragedy. Not the fact that she was alone for so long, but because she might have been able to be saved in the next couple of years. We're going to talk about it on this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. I am coming to you from a different microphone. It probably sounds a little different, hopefully not too different, and it sounds pretty good. But I'm at my parents' house. It's March break. My kids are away. My wife's at home. I'm here at my parents' house hanging out because I don't really get to see them that often. And hockey's on a break. So this weekend I decided to stay over at my parents' house and work from home, from their place instead of my place on Monday. So I am recording this Sunday evening because I had to. Because I found out this weekend something tragic happened. An orca at Marineland named Kiska passed away after being alone since 2011 in a tank. She's dubbed the loneliest whale in the world. And the article that I'm going to be looking at today was from the Whale Sanctuary Project. If you don't know what this Whale Sanctuary Project is, it's a project that's trying to basically free orcas and other marine mammals so that they can stay in the wild, but not quite the wild proper. You know, when we talk about the wild, when we talk about releasing orcas, they cannot be released into the wild and just fend for themselves. Many of the orcas have been, just like Kiska, have been in captivity since they were young. They've lost the ability to hunt. From what we know of, they've been fed for most of their lives, and they need to relearn how to feed on their own, and some may never feed on their own. I did a great couple of podcasts with Dr. Naomi Rose in the early days of this podcast in 2015, 2016, 2017. We talked about Blackfish, the movie, the documentary that kind of exposed most of the turmoil and controversy around orca captivity and marine mammal captivity back in early, I think it was 2013, 2014. And, you know, we talked a lot about what captivity did to orcas, not only from a physical point of view, but also from a psychological and emotional point of view. And so, you know, we talked a lot about that, but, you know, a lot of the times talking about what we can do with orcas to when we release them, because that's the ultimate goal. Is now that in the US and Canada there are protections against gaining new orcas or having breeding programs for orcas, you cannot bring an orca or a marine mammal into captivity anymore. And you cannot hold them, you cannot run shows with them, you cannot breed them or anything like that. And so what we're doing now is we're looking at trying to release some of them. And if it's possible, identify whether they can be released. There has been an example that's happened, and that was Kiko, right? The Kiko from Free Willy, which is interesting because Keiko is actually, kind of intertwined with this in this story, which I find very interesting. But just to kind of go over what happened this weekend, on March 10th, Marineland announced that Kiska had died of a bacterial infection, and the news was devastating to everybody around the world. People have been trying to get Kiska released for I don't know how long. Forever, really. It seems like forever since she was captured, I guess. But especially over the last number of years where she's been in isolation. She lives alone in a tank in Marineland. No family members are swam by her side. She holds a cruel distinction of being the only captive orca in North America held in social isolation from any other marine mammal. And then a lot of times when you saw video footage of Kiska, there she was either sort of floating, just floating, like almost looked like she wasn't alive. You also saw her kind of just going in circles or just doing constant patterns, which we now know is not a good thing. And you also saw her in a more aggressive manner, smashing her head against the tank walls and the tank glass. Which obviously, like when you see it, I've talked about it before on the podcast, and it's graphic, it's disheartening, it's cruel almost to see this orca be tortured like that in a way. And so it's really hard. In those past podcasts where I talked about Kiska and what she was doing, I mentioned, and I'll mention it again now, I live in Ontario. Marineland is in Ontario. It's about a 45-minute drive from my house. I went there when I was a kid. We watched the shows just like a lot of other people watch the shows. I went there as recent as, I would say, early 2000s, where, I took my girlfriend, who is my wife right now, and we went there. And when we went to that show, we went to obviously the orca show because it was something that was, you know, I thought it was important to see. I was a marine biologist, and I didn't really know, I had no idea at the time. I had just graduated from university, and I had no idea at the time what these marine sort of theme parks were really doing because I grew up with Marineland. The advertisement was everyone loves Marineland. That was the jingle that would go through all of our heads. If you talked about anybody who grew up in the 80s and 90s in Ontario, that song will ring in their head over and over and over again. And we would just go there. There were rides, there were bears, there were beluga whales, there were dolphins, there were deer. It's just a very bizarre kind of park that was, I guess, refreshing, for someone who wanted to be a marine biologist. So I took my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, to this Marineland, and we watched the show, and the marine mammal show. And when the dolphins came out, and I've told the story over and over again, so I apologize if you've heard it. So I'll make it brief. But when the dolphins came out, one of the dolphins got stuck or got cut on the gates when they were coming out, and there was blood coming from the blowhole throughout the show. Somebody came out, looked at the dolphin, and put him back in the show, and that dolphin continued with the show. They made the announcement that the dolphins will do the show because they like doing the show, and if they don't, they think they've done something wrong. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know the psychology of dolphins, but it just didn't seem right. It didn't seem right to let that dolphin continue on. It was quite graphic. There was quite a good amount of blood. Even my girlfriend at the time was just like, I don't ever want to see this show again. Like this bothers me. And so, when you look at Kiska, you look at the story of Kiska, you look at the story of Marineland and the controversies that happened with Marineland. There are so many marine mammals that have had problems, that have died from bad water quality issues, from bacterial infections. I covered something back in the summer, a podcast where we talked about how belugas were being transferred to the Mystic Aquarium. And those belugas from Marineland, there was a bit of a controversial move. They switched out 3 of the belugas because they weren't fit for travel, because there were so many problems with water quality issues and health, that they just switched them out, and 2 of them have already died at Mystic Aquarium within the last 6 months. Obviously not something that we want to see, but there's obviously something going on at Marineland. There have been countless calls to check Marineland for water quality issues, for health issues of the animals, and it's continuous. It's just a vicious cycle that goes over and over and over again, and it's extremely frustrating as an animal advocate, as a scientist, as a marine conservationist, to see Marineland get away with all this stuff, all this controversy, and not get punished. Whether it just be a fine or not get punished enough, where they either have to sell it or have to do something. Regardless, Kiska has been in captivity since 1979. I want to go over her story because I think it's important to kind of find out where she's from and what she's doing. So she was captured in 1979 at the age of 3, around the age of 3, from the North Atlantic Ocean. She was taken into an aquarium in Iceland, where she was housed briefly with 4 young orcas, including Keiko, who was the future star of Free Willy movies. Shortly after, she was sold, along with Keiko, to Marineland. Keiko was then resold into an entertainment park in Mexico, but would later be rescued, rehabilitated, and returned to the ocean near Iceland. So, we know the story of Keiko. If you've watched Free Willy, highly recommend it. And I did a podcast on, I'll try to link to it. I did a podcast on Keiko a while ago and what happened with Keiko and why it was important to listen to that story about how successful it was. Members of the Whale Sanctuary Project who took part in their rescue discussed Keiko's, and you can go on this website to find out more. Meanwhile, at Marineland, Kiska gave birth as a young adult to 5 calves. All of them died young. So there was Athena, Hudson, Nova, Canuck, and one who didn't even survive long enough to be named, unfortunately. Studies suggest that orcas' captivity to feel deep, complex emotion rivals or even exceeds the emotional capacity processed by humans. The bond between mother and calf is so deep that it is hard to imagine the grief and trauma of Kiska's losses over the years. Now, if you think about it, Kiska, when an orca loses a calf, they will have a memorial for it. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. We've seen it recently with orcas in the Pacific Northwest, where they would float the calf above the surface. The mother would do it, and when the mother got tired, other members of the pod would do it, and they would float it at the surface as a bit of a memorial. Other marine mammals do it. And we've seen this behavior done multiple times. It's very sad. It's done for weeks, and it's sort of a tribute to that calf. And I guess it's a way for that mother and the rest of the pod to sort of mourn the loss of that new calf. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the complex emotions of this massive marine mammal, right? This apex predator that feels deeply for its own pod. So just imagine at the age of 3 getting separated from its pod. And from the stories that we've heard in the Pacific Northwest of how those orcas were separated and captured in the 1970s, you're probably thinking the same way that they were captured in the North Atlantic, right? They were probably driven away aggressively with boats and helicopters and so forth, away from the rest of the pod. Young calves being separated from their mothers, which doesn't happen often. The mothers usually keep them quite close in the pod on the insides. They're being separated. There's emotional trauma from the mother and the calf being captured. There's the fact that it's actually being picked up out of the water and brought to another place, and then have to being transferred again and again and again. Then having to be in captivity, and then all of a sudden they're being bred, right? They're being bred, or they're breeding, right? So they're like, you have 5 calves, all of them don't survive, right? None of them survive. And you don't know what toll that takes on this orca mother, losing all these calves. That's a tough thing to do. And so for marine parks, it says on this website, the death of a calf is just a business loss. But so in 2001, when Kiska was 25 years old and with no surviving males with whom she could be bred again, Marineland approached Busch Gardens, who at the time owned SeaWorld, about the possibility of acquiring a male orca. So Busch Gardens, which had been looking for some beluga whales, offered to make an agreement whereby one male orca from SeaWorld facility would be loaned to Marineland in exchange for 4 beluga whales. There was a bit of a negotiation. Marineland said it wouldn't go higher than 3. Busch Gardens insisted on 4, but finally offered to throw in a couple of SeaWorld trained sea lions. And so the deal was done. Now think about this. This is like a trade on a hockey team. It's like a trade on a football team. I'll throw in a couple of extra sea lions if you give me an extra beluga. It's all a bit, and Marineland is a private organization. They make money. That's their business. Their business, is obviously education as well. But with the way they've been treating animals, it's just not a good business plan. So shortly thereafter, Ike, or Akeka, was a 4-year-old orca at SeaWorld Orlando, was flown to Marineland in Niagara Falls. He was too young to breed, so the plan was for him to develop a relationship with Kiska and another female orca and become a father in the coming years. The contract stipulated that the two companies would alternate ownership of baby whales. Ike arrived in Marineland with dental problems, most likely from chewing on metal bars from his pool, and he needed daily treatment along with antibiotics and pain medication. The expectation for the was for Marineland to keep up his treatments, but his teeth were going bad to worse. So in 2009, SeaWorld decided they could give him better care. Instead, they wanted him back, but Marineland didn't want to give him up. Again, looking at health over the best for the orca. As reported by the Toronto Star at the time, the dispute ended up in court. SeaWorld won, Marineland appealed and lost again, and Ike was shipped back to the United States. Since that time, Kiska has lived alone in her concrete tank. Although still on display, she no longer performs for the public. According to Marineland officials, she spends her golden years doing what she wants. Not really, though, right? Doing what she wants in a small concrete tank. So here's the interesting part, and here's the frustrating part of the story for Kiska. In June 2019, the Canadian Parliament voted overwhelmingly to pass Bill S-203, the Ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins Act, which phases out the captivity of cetaceans in Canada. In February 2020, the Marine Sanctuary Project announced its selection of Port Hilford Bay, Nova Scotia, as the best site to create a seaside sanctuary for whales being retired from entertainment parks. This would be an ideal retirement location for Kiska. Kiska was being thought of. She was being, she was the prime candidate. By herself, she might be able to go into this seaside whale sanctuary or whale sanctuary project. It would have been perfect for her. She was living in Canadian waters. It would have been a quick flight. She was by herself anyway. This would have been a perfect thing. But also in 2020, Parliament took up a second bill, S-241, the Jane Goodall Act, which strengthens the provisions of the earlier bill while extending them to other kinds of animals. As the bill works its way through Parliament, several senators have specifically mentioned the urgency of retiring Kiska to the sanctuary. So there was political will to retire Kiska to the sanctuary. There was a conservation will and advocacy will to do that. But the bill's preamble observes that the Ontario government has jurisdiction to grant civil standing to Kiska. This would allow for a court order in her best interest by her own right, such as relocation to the whale sanctuary plan for Port Hilford, Nova Scotia. At the end of 2021, the Whale Sanctuary Project had a discussion with Marineland about the possibility of transferring whales from their facility to the sanctuary at the appropriate time. The meeting was cordial and positive, and they even set some dates for future meetings. 3 days later, however, the Niagara Police charged Marineland with using whales and dolphins for entertainment purposes. We all knew this was happening. There was video of this happening. I mentioned it in the podcast. It was very, very frustrating. So the entertainment purposes was in prohibition of under the Ending of Captivity in Whales Act, Dolphins Act. So at that time, Marineland broke off the discussions with the Whale Sanctuary Project. They were angry. They were pissed, right? They got charged. They were like, screw this. We're not going to look out for the best interest of this animal because we have to pay fees and we need to make it up. So a year later, after several procedural court hearings, the Crown Attorney of the Regional Niagara announced, Niagara is where Marineland resides in Ontario, announced that the prosecution was not in the public interest and that he was dropping the charges, saying the Crown determined that the stay of these charges was appropriate. So they decided not to go through with the charges. So the closing of this case presented an opportunity for Marineland to reopen discussions towards retiring Kiska to the sanctuary. On February 7th, 2023, Mayor Jim Diodati from Niagara Falls confirmed with a local TV station the possibility of the sale of Marineland and said the first priority for the city would be the care and safety of the animals. So this would be even better. The fact that Marineland was being sold, the new owners could make a really great introduction by saying, hey, we're going to retire Kiska into the Whale Sanctuary Project. Unfortunately, that was February 7th, 2023. And we are March 10th. Well, just after that. But on March 10th, Kiska passed away. So, unfortunately, it was too late for Kiska. But it's not too late for other orcas. And it goes to show that we don't have all the time in the world. We don't have all the time in the world to save these orcas. Kiska was 47 years old, and she passed away from a bacterial infection, most likely due to water quality within the tanks. These animals, although they're big, they can be sensitive emotionally, physically, and mentally. And you just never know when something bad is going to happen. And we saw this right. This is a prime example. A prime example. And it's such a waste that we could have had this done 2 years ago. We could have had this done even earlier. The Whale Sanctuary Project is a great project, and I would like to see orcas get retired into that area in Nova Scotia as soon as possible. And I feel like in the name of Kiska, we need to do that. Right? This is conservation of these orcas. These are complex organisms. These are apex predators. They have a very strong bond to each other in their pods. They cannot live on their own. It's like torture. We've all been in isolation for the last 2 years for the most part, and it sucked. It sucked really bad. But we survived because we were able to survive. We had communication with each other outside of just our homes. Right? We can talk to each other. We can Zoom chat each other. We can go on all this. We have all this technology to chat each other. These orcas don't have that. There is a deep connection with each other in their pods. The fact that the orca could have been returned back to the North Atlantic would have been amazing, right? It would have been a prime candidate for it to happen, and we lost out on it. And the Whale Sanctuary Project said that the loss of Kiska will only intensify the urgency of their team to help Marineland relocate approximately 34 belugas and 5 dolphins who remain there. And we look to every available means to transfer as many as possible to the sanctuaries. So the will to get these marine mammals to the sanctuaries has intensified because of the loss of Kiska, hopefully in the name of Kiska. Hopefully we can remember this orca, unfortunately sacrificed for the greater greed of Marineland and not being able to live on their own, right? And in a beautiful ocean. And so we need to do less supporting of these facilities who are still running shows, not caring for their animals properly, and not funding them properly. And we need to really get them there. Now, I want to preface this with the trainers who look after and spend their days with these animals are not necessarily the bad guys. I don't want to vilify them, right? This is not to vilify anybody except for the companies, right? The companies themselves know what they're doing. They know that they could get large profits with these animals. They've done it for a while. And I understand why they did it. I understand for the educational purposes, the way to connect to orcas, for humans to connect to orcas. However, that experiment failed a long time ago. And we should have realized that a long time ago. And the company should have gotten those orcas out and back into the ocean as soon as possible. And they need to continue to do that. And without that, we're lost. Without that, these orcas are going to continue to be tortured as you're listening to this, as I'm recording this, and as you're listening to this, they continue to be tortured. They continue to be isolated from the rest of their pod. There's a deep connection with a lot of indigenous people in the Northwest. There's another orca in the Seaquarium in Miami who has a deep connection to the indigenous tribes in the Pacific Northwest. They have a belief system where their ancestors, their souls go into the orcas, and that they have a lot. And it's very similar, to be honest, to sort of the movie, the James Cameron movie. What's it called? I can't remember. It's late right now, and I can't remember what it's called. Avatar, right? But this is real life. And there's a deep connection with a lot of the indigenous tribes to those Pacific Northwest whales, the southern resident orca population. And right now, that one of those orcas is by itself all the way in Miami, right? And that's a shame, right? And so These orcas need to be rescued. These orcas need to be put back with their family, or at least put back into the ocean so they can live the rest of their days in peace, the rest of the days in happiness, or better, and in better off in better conditions. So that's my message today. It is a very tragic day. I'm sorry to be able I'm sorry that I have to tell you this news if you haven't heard about it before. It's very frustrating. There are a lot of people who are extremely angry. There are a lot of people who are a little bit relieved for Kiska because she doesn't have to go through that torture anymore. But it's also very sad. It's very sad because this orca's life was wasted because for entertainment purposes and for greed, and we need to stop this. And so I highly recommend the call to action today would be to support the Whale Sanctuary Project. I'm going to put a link to this article that they've published. I'm also going to put a link. There's also links to their donate button if you feel the need and you're able to donate to the Whale Sanctuary Project to help them get more whales, more marine mammals retired into their seaside sanctuary. I would love to see that happen. And if you do donate, please let me know. I would love to congratulate you and to say thank you for doing that donation. You can get a hold of me at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. You can also contact me through our speakupforblue.com website. That's speakupforblue.com. And all you have to do is click on the Contact Us page. You fill out the form that goes right to my email personally, or my work email. And in that, I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news on the beginning of this week, or whatever time you're listening to this podcast, but I feel it's important. It's an important story. It's important that we remember Kiska for who she was and what she had to go through, and hopefully we will never see this happen again. The good news is with this ending the whale and dolphin captivity, or ending captivity of whales and dolphins act in Canada, we will never see an orca in Canada in a marine theme park ever again, and that's a good thing. So, but we still have a lot of work to do with belugas and dolphins, and of course in the U.S. and around the world, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that these orcas are not captured, are not put in aquariums or marine theme parks, and they can live out their lives where they're supposed to in the ocean. So, I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.